My interpretation is that they felt it was a challenge to orthodoxy and it needed to be silenced, so they smeared me and anyone that supported me. There's continued harassment and career sabotage of anyone that expresses a conservative viewpoint. And there's constant shaming and attacks against white men within Silicon Valley. If you ever open up that you have certain viewpoints, then your career will be sabotaged.
That was former Google engineer James Damore and his lawyer Harmeet Dhillon with us last night in the Fox Business exclusive. Damore, as you may recall, was fired for writing a controversial memo that blasted left-leaning Google and its, quote, unfair and divisive discrimination practices. And he has now filed a class action lawsuit for Google's alleged intolerance towards white conservative men. Harmeet Dhillon is back with us tonight. Harmeet, thanks for coming back. A lot of reaction to that interview. Google, of course, put out a statement before the show was over. I want to get back to this. The notion that Silicon Valley is somehow inherently discriminating against white conservative men. What is the basis for that, and how can you prove that perhaps there may be political ideological differences, but this somehow harms or sabotages their career?
So, Charles, they're actually not, the lawsuit's not about white conservative men, but it's about three classes of people. It's conservatives, it's Caucasians and Asians, and it's men. So there's overlap there. There are women included in that class, okay? So that's point number one. But point number two is each of those different categories we have demonstrated by evidence in our complaint that's alleged. For example, conservatives are subject to shaming. It's perfectly tolerated at Google to put very negative characterizations of people who are Republican or who may have supported Donald Trump in the election, and even talk about equating those people to Nazis and to punching them, which is pretty offensive and outrageous. That type of language, by the way, is not used by conservatives and certainly wouldn't be tolerated. So there's a clear bias there. And then we've also noted a number of instances at Google where there are group meetings where groups that have less women than men are shamed by booing at the managers who have that disparity. And, people are constantly reminded that white men are cheesy and white men should self-select out of speaking opportunities at Google and outside the company. So it's a constant barrage on a daily basis that everything having to do with a racial or gender disparity at Google has a bias-related explanation as opposed to some other explanation,
right,
like people making their own choices or different choices.
Right, and of course there was a lot of controversy during the election process, not just with Google, but Silicon Valley in general, and questions about the way they treated conservative ideas. Facebook obviously infamous for this as well. But there's also been a lot of talk about a lack of diversity when it comes to blacks, Hispanics, and others, and even women. So how do you square those two things? That on one hand, women are saying, "Hey, we're actually discriminated against in Silicon Valley," and progressive women at that. On the other hand, you're saying conservative men, particularly Caucasian.
So there are two different kinds of disparity, and both of them can occur simultaneously. I believe they are occurring. So in the case of women who are suing Google right now, they're not saying that we're not getting hired at Google, because they are getting hired. In fact, they get hired much more easily and quickly and promoted faster than men. What they're saying is that Google is paying us less than the men. They may be doing that. Why not, if they can get away with it? So, I think
right,
they're probably doing that. That's illegal as well, and that should be remedied by the courts if Google doesn't fix that problem. Now, Google is obviously saying that the methodology to prove their cases is flawed. It's not true, but they're going to have a burden of proving that, and
right,
the women have come forward with some interesting evidence.
Harmeet, thank you very much for last night and for coming back tonight as well. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.